A student finished her shift and vanished during a phone call with her boyfriend under bizarre circumstances. The police quickly launched a search, combing through hours of surveillance footage, hoping to find any clues. Soon, they came across something truly chilling, but the young woman's fate remained a mystery for months. Eventually, investigators uncovered the truth, but the outcome of the case sparked widespread outrage and disbelief. Drew Sheedin was born on September 26, 1981, in the small town of Pequea Lakes, Minnesota. From an early age, Drew was full of energy and determination. She loved drawing, crafting, and keeping active with basketball, volleyball, and golf. She was also involved in various charity programs, always looking for ways to help anyone in need. Her warm personality and genuine kindness made her a lot of friends, and in high school, she was even voted prom queen. After graduating, Drew enrolled at the University of North Dakota, where she majored in fine arts. Even though the campus was a 3-hour drive from her hometown, she tried to visit her parents as often as she could. Drew managed to juggle her studies where she excelled, 2 part-time jobs, and an active role in campus life. She also continued to dedicate her time to charity, never losing sight of what mattered most to her. On top of that, Drew signed up for a special university program that gave her the chance to travel on a regular basis, and she was especially excited about her upcoming trip to Australia. While in college, Drew started dating a guy named Chris. The two quickly became serious and began making big plans for their future together. On November 22, 2003, 22-year-old Drew headed out for her usual weekend shift at a clothing store where she worked part-time. Later that evening, she was scheduled to work as a waitress at a local club. After finishing her first shift, Drew stopped by a shop in the same mall, bought herself a purse, and walked toward the parking lot. On the way, she called her boyfriend, Chris, and they chatted for about 4 minutes. But then, something strange happened. Drew suddenly went silent in the middle of the conversation. After a pause, she said, "Oh my God." Then the line went dead. At first, Chris didn't think much of it. He assumed the call had dropped as Drew walked through the parking lot or that her phone battery had died. 3 hours later, Chris received another call from Drew's phone. But when he answered, all he could hear was silence. There was a faint noise in the background, something that sounded like wind, along with what seemed to be the sound of phone buttons being pressed. He called out Drew's name several times, but there was no response. Chris tried calling her back, but Drew didn't answer. This time, he started to worry. He decided to call her roommate to see if she had heard from Drew. The roommate said she hadn't spoken to her all day, but reassured him, saying Drew was probably just busy with work and there was no need to panic. Shortly after the conversation, though, Drew's roommate got a call from the manager at the club where Drew was supposed to work that evening. To her surprise, the manager said Drew hadn't shown up for her shift and she hadn't even called to let anyone know. This was completely out of character for Drew as she was always responsible and reliable. Her roommate, recalling the strange call Chris had mentioned, began to worry that something bad might have happened. She started calling local hospitals, thinking Drew might have been admitted somewhere, but no one matching her description had been brought in. By then, it was late in the evening, and the roommate decided it was time to contact the police. She explained that Drew had missed her shift, didn't come home, and had some unsettling phone calls with her boyfriend. But the police didn't see any immediate cause for alarm. To them, there wasn't enough evidence to suggest something serious had happened. After all, Drew was 22, so they just recommended waiting a little longer before taking any action. Still, Drew's roommate decided to take matters into her own hands and reached out to the University of North Dakota's campus police. Unlike the city police, they jumped right into action. Their first stop was the mall where Drew had worked that day. It was the last place anyone had seen or heard from her. When they checked the parking lot, they found her car still in its usual spot, even though her shift had ended hours ago. Another weird thing was the fact that the car doors were unlocked. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle or anything to indicate that something bad had happened. But then the officers noticed something really suspicious. Lying on the ground near the car was a small knife sheath. This discovery raised serious concerns, prompting the university police to contact the city police, who finally stepped in. Officers requested CCTV footage from the parking lot, hoping for a lead. But there was a problem. Drew's car was parked in a blind spot, completely out of the camera's view. Determined to figure out what happened, investigators turned to the mall's security footage. They started combing through hours of video from every camera inside the building, trying to trace Drew's movements before she vanished. It was quite a challenge given the size of the mall, so the process was anything but quick. Meanwhile, news of Drew's disappearance quickly spread across campus. The university wasted no time organizing a massive search effort. Hundreds of students stepped up to help, scouring streets, wooded trails, riverbanks, and other secluded areas. The faculty also urged anyone with information to come forward, hoping for a clue that could shed light on what had happened to Drew. Meanwhile, the police got hold of Drew's phone records, which backed up her boyfriend's story about their last call. But when they dug into the phone's location data, they found something odd. The cell tower pings showed that Drew's final call to Chris hadn't come from the mall parking lot. Instead, it had been made from a nearby town, about a 30-minute drive away. Based on the timeline, investigators realized that the noises Chris heard during the call, like the sound of wind and buttons being pressed, could have occurred while Drew was already in this other location. Since her car was still parked at the mall, it was clear Drew couldn't have gotten to another town on her own. This led police to suspect that she may have been abducted. But despite their extensive efforts, the next few days passed without any new leads. Officers kept combing through the mall's surveillance footage while search teams scoured the city, desperately hoping to find even the smallest clue. 2 days later, the case finally took a turn. In a small town called Crookston, near the spot where Drew's phone last pinged, police found a black shoe by the riverbank. When they showed it to Drew's roommate, she immediately recognized it. It was one of Drew's. This discovery deepened investigators' fears. If Drew had been abducted, the evidence suggested she'd been taken far from her town. Police quickly contacted other departments in the area, sharing details of the case and asking for their help in the search. Meanwhile, investigators finally found CCTV footage from the mall that showed Drew on the day she disappeared. They saw her visiting several stores after her shift, seemingly shopping for Christmas gifts for her loved ones. This footage gave investigators a clear idea of what Drew was wearing at the time she vanished. It also confirmed that she had been wearing the same black shoes as the one found near the river in the neighboring town. With all the available clips featuring Drew in hand, investigators started analyzing the footage for any suspicious individuals who might have been following her or appeared in multiple frames with her. Before long, one person caught their attention. A middle-aged man dressed in all black, walking with a cane. His unusual behavior stood out immediately. According to the CCTV footage, the man entered the grocery store connected to the mall multiple times. However, he never bought anything. Instead, he appeared to ignore the shelves entirely and focus on other shoppers, particularly women. Investigators soon spotted the same man on other footage taken outside the store. He was sitting on a bench watching passers-by. But then something truly suspicious happened. When a young woman who vaguely resembled Drew walked past him, he got up from the bench and started following her. Over the next few hours, the police uncovered more clips showing the same man following other young women around the mall. Unfortunately, the footage alone didn't give them enough to identify him, so detectives turned to their database, searching through records of men in the area with prior convictions for serious crimes. After compiling a list of 60 names, the investigators narrowed it down to just 4, eliminating anyone who didn't match the suspect's description. From the remaining candidates, they identified one man who bore a striking resemblance to the figure in the mall footage, 50-year-old Alfonso Rodriguez. Rodriguez had an extensive criminal history and a troubled past. He had struggled with severe health issues since childhood, which made school and social interactions, especially with women, extremely challenging. For instance, one of his legs was shorter than the other, forcing him to rely on a cane to walk. Alfonso eventually turned to drugs, and at 21 he had his first run-in with the law. He attempted to assault a woman who had offered him a ride home. Once inside her car, he pulled out a knife and tried to attack her, but the victim managed to fight him off. Not long after, he attacked 2 more women in the same month. He was sentenced to 5 years of mandatory therapy and then released back into the community. That same year, Alfonso was arrested again, this time in suspicion of assault. However, the prosecution couldn't gather enough evidence for a conviction. Shortly after, he attempted to abduct another woman, stabbing her during the attack. This time, he was caught and convicted. Rodriguez was sentenced to 23 years in prison, but was released on May 1, 2003, just 7 months before Drew went missing. What's even more troubling is that he was placed under the supervision of his relatives, who themselves doubted whether he was ready to return to society. Following his release, Alfonso moved in with his mother in Crookston, the very town where Drew's shoe had been discovered. Given all of this, detectives were almost certain Alfonso was connected to Drew's disappearance. On the 4th day of the investigation, they brought him in for questioning. Alfonso admitted he had been at the mall, but insisted he had nothing to do with the abduction. He claimed he was there to watch a movie at the theater inside the mall. He even named a specific film, but when investigators checked his story, they discovered that the movie wasn't playing, not just at that theater, but nowhere in the entire town. Realizing Alfonso had lied, the police asked to search his car. Surprisingly, he agreed without requiring a warrant. Inside, they found a receipt from a store showing he had purchased a pocket knife. When detectives looked into the knife's model, they determined that the sheath found near Drew's car was an exact match. But that wasn't the most alarming discovery. The knife itself was also in Alfonso's car, submerged in a bottle filled with cleaning solution. When forensic experts examined Alfonso's car, they discovered traces of wiped blood. They managed to extract a DNA sample, which was then compared to DNA taken from Drew's toothbrush. It was a perfect match. On top of that, they found a woman's shoe in his car and another knife. This one hadn't been soaked in cleaning solution. When they tested it, they discovered traces of blood on the blade. DNA analysis confirmed it was Drew's. By December 10th, with all the evidence in hand, Alfonso was arrested and charged with kidnapping and suspected murder. However, despite how damning the case against him seemed, detectives still had no idea what had actually happened to Drew or where she was. Alfonso refused to confess, so police focused all their efforts on finding Drew. They appealed to the public for help, brought in even more volunteers, and concentrated their search on Crookston and the surrounding areas. But despite their best efforts, months went by with no results. Heavy snowfall that winter made the situation even worse, as search teams were unable to access remote areas. By early March, 3 months after Drew disappeared, preparations began for Alfonso's trial, and he pleaded not guilty before the judge. At this point, almost no one believed Drew was still alive, but with all the evidence they had, prosecutors were confident they could secure a conviction. Meanwhile, police pressed on with their search. As spring arrived and the snow started to melt, they were finally able to explore previously inaccessible areas, like forests, open fields, and bodies of water. This continued until April 17th, when investigators received the sad but expected news. Drew's body had been found a few miles west of Crookston, submerged in the local river. During the winter, the area had been frozen over and covered in snow, making it nearly impossible for search teams to locate her earlier. But as soon as the snow fully melted, her body was quickly discovered. Medical examiners found bruises, knife wounds, and evidence of SA on her body. As for the cause of death, they couldn't reach a definitive conclusion. Along with the stab wounds, there were signs of strangulation, but there was also a possibility that she died from exposure to the cold after being left in that location. It was determined that Drew had likely died about 3 hours after she was abducted. Now that the police had found Drew's body, the prosecution had one final task: to ensure the killer faced justice. Since the abduction occurred in North Dakota, but the murder took place in neighboring Minnesota, the case fell under federal jurisdiction. This meant Alfonso could face the death penalty, even though capital punishment was banned in both states. Despite this, the governor of Minnesota publicly supported the possibility of a death sentence, though many residents of his state opposed it. In North Dakota, this case was the first in over a century where a resident faced the prospect of the death penalty. The trial began in the summer of 2006, and Alfonso continued maintaining his innocence. But with the overwhelming evidence against him, there was almost no chance of avoiding punishment, and on February 8, 2007, he was sentenced to death. As is often the case with capital punishment, the execution was delayed for years. During this time, Alfonso remained in prison, awaiting his fate. Meanwhile, Drew's family got actively involved in pushing for a law to create a national registry of offenders convicted of violent crimes. In the summer of 2007, this law, named in Drew's memory, was signed by the president. It set up a website where the public could access addresses and other personal information of people convicted of violent offenses. Drew's parents repeatedly said that Alfonso should never have been released from prison in the first place. Later, even the doctor in charge of the mandatory rehab spoke out, telling reporters he had strongly opposed his release. He'd recommended transferring Alfonso from the clinic to prison because he believed Alfonso still posed a danger to society. Despite these warnings, Alfonso was allowed back into the community, a decision that ended in tragedy. Unfortunately for Drew's family, the sentencing of Alfonso Rodriguez didn't mark the end of the case. In 2011, Rodriguez's lawyers filed an appeal, claiming that their client suffered from developmental issues. While this initial attempt failed, a second appeal, filed 10 years later in 2021, was far more successful. This time, the judge ruled in favor of the defense. He acknowledged evidence suggesting Rodriguez did have developmental challenges and noted that his attorneys hadn't been given a fair chance to present these details during the original trial. The judge also highlighted Rodriguez's troubled childhood and significant health problems. The defense team further argued that the medical examiner who testified during the trial had exaggerated the extent of Drew's injuries, suggesting that the truth wasn't as horrific as it had been made to seem. All of this ultimately led to reopening the case, leaving Drew's family to once again fight for justice. In the end, the judge overturned Rodriguez's death sentence and ordered a new trial. As a result, in March 2023, Alfonso was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What's particularly unsettling is that Rodriguez had already confessed to the crime during a 2013 interview from death row. However, now he will spend the rest of his life behind bars, no longer facing the threat of execution. In Drew's memory, her university established a scholarship that remains active to this day. Her family also created a memorial garden in her hometown, and plans are underway to build a similar memorial on her university campus. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video.